Hello and welcome back to another ESTIS webinar. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Liz Jarvis, who is Director of Legal Search at Landmark Information Group, and Rob Gurney, who is the Managing Director of Ocrasoft. Welcome both to today's ESTIS webinar.
Thanks very much, Ben.
No worries. So I have some questions for you about conveyancing, and I think this is a very hot topic at the moment, and one of an area that I think there's a lot of good work that's going on out there at the moment, and I think that there's a lot of things that people have been talking about for a long time and are still talking about things now, and maybe in a year or so they might still be talking about that same thing. But hopefully today we're going to cover off some of the topics with regards to conveyancing now and the future, and what that might look like for the next 12 months. So I guess a question to both of you. A very high proportion of conveyancers are saying that receiving data insights on a property transaction earlier would speed up the process. Yet a lot of them believe it will also reduce additional inquiries. Why do you think that is?
Shall I go first, Liz?
Please, Joe.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. In terms of, I think, to hit the nail on the head, talking about earlier in the process is sort of paramount here. We're talking about the upfront information sort of crusade to bring things forward in a transaction, with the hope that that will ultimately speed up the conveyancing process when a buyer's offer is accepted and both sets of lawyers get into action. And for me, I'm quite surprised that actually that statistic in terms of it reducing additional inquiries is actually as low as it is. I think the actual statistics suggest that 55% of conveyancers believe if they get the data insights earlier, then inquiries would be reduced. And for me, it's almost why isn't it 100%? Because the whole purpose of upfront information is to get the seller's lawyer instructed before the property is sold, i.e. at the point that the estate agent lists the property, get the conveyancer on board at that stage, because that gives this golden window of opportunity to the lawyer to put together all the information they know the buyer's lawyer is going to need when ultimately the property sells. And if you know everything that the buyer's lawyer is going to want to know in the transaction ahead of time, and crucially, you have that time to put that perfect contract pack together, then for me, we should be talking about not just reducing the additional inquiries process, which we know everyone hates, but actually eradicating it. Because, if you're providing all of the information ahead of being asked for it, then that for me is kind of the ultimate dream here. So upfront information will only work if the lawyer gets instructed at the point of listing. But if that does happen and we move as an industry more towards that being the norm, then I actually think that we could see quite a significant increase in the efficiency of the onward conveyancing transaction. So that's my sort of dream and my take on that question.
And just to add to that, really, Rob, from me, I'm speaking from the perspective of the local search. There are so many things that might be disclosed when the purchaser would want to see planning approvals, conditions they were granted on, financial burdens, things, everything like that, public rights of way, conservation areas, just to name a couple. By providing that heads up right at the start of the transaction, you're giving the vendor time to assemble all the documents that the buyer wants to see, but critically, it gives the buyer a chance then to decide early on if they want to proceed now that they're in full possession of the information around their purchase. Because if that information is provided at the end, then we're only opening ourselves up to delayed completions, or even worse, sales falling through further on in the process, which just wastes everyone's time and, of course, money.
Absolutely. I think it says, as someone who's gone through that process myself, I was quite surprised as to how late in the stage that happened. I mean, I haven't moved for 7 years now, but you're absolutely right. It's almost like, why hide it? it's going to come up,
Mm,
let people
Ready
know
up
about it
front.
straight away.
Yep,
You know,
yep.
if you're an estate agent and you know that there's something under the cupboard, you wouldn't keep the cupboard locked and not let anyone look in it until the very last minute. Do you know what I mean? It's like you have to know
absolutely.
everything, warts and all, right?
Yeah, I mean, I used to be a former property lawyer, and again, you know, not just from a local search perspective, Liz, but yeah, from an actual legal title perspective, if you can, you know, spend a bit of time and analyze the legal title and, you know, for any potential defects, yeah, you know that if they exist, the buyer's lawyer is going to raise them mid-conveyancing transaction. So sort it out beforehand. Yeah, know what you're selling, and remedy it if you can, because it's just going to save so much pain and also delays later on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, I think when we're talking about upfront information, this is something that is not new. This is something that's been talking about for a long time, and I have no doubt that we'll still be talking about it down the line as well. Hopefully, in a more positive fashion in terms of things are moving on. But there's definitely a very strong topic there, and not to focus on this solely, but when you mentioned, Rob, that just over half of conveyancers believe it would reducing additional inquiries, I guess my question and thought to that is, why do 45% think it won't? Is that because they're not going to get on board with it or ignore that information? It's what do you?
I don't know. Maybe they're not joining up all the dots, but for me, if you can process information earlier and and ascertain what the buyer's lawyer is going to need before they ask for it, and crucially then supply that information, that data, up front, then why would you ever need that inquiries process to even exist? The only point of additional inquiries is to ask for stuff that you haven't already got. So let's preempt that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, look, I think it's definitely a topic we could probably spend a lot more time discussing in detail. But just to move things in a slightly different direction. So, Rob, this is probably more aimed at yourself here. Conveyancers are saying that kind of legislation, the changes, and how that's impacting their role, some to a bigger extent than others. Why do you think they're feeling that?
I think that there's definitely something that we call scope creep that's existed in quite a long time, in conveyancing, but has become more and more sort of prevalent and perhaps more understood in more recent times. Landmark did a piece of work a while ago to sort of look at the additional responsibilities that have been added on to the role of the conveyancer over time. And we actually think that that's doubled in the last 15 years.
Wow.
But it's happened in piecemeal ways so that people don't necessarily suddenly go, hang on a second, we've got double the work that we used to, because it's happening gradually over time. But it all adds up. And things like these additional responsibilities, some of them are legislative in nature, and think about over the last 15 years, we've introduced money laundering regulations and that kind of stuff, which we didn't used to have. Now we do. It takes more time, but more recently, and I think the statistic actually, Ben, is 89% of conveyancers that were asked the question have said that recent legislative changes have impacted their work. And I think that's probably solely down to the Building Safety Act of 22. That has had quite a sort of profound impact on the profession. Discovering impacted properties mid-transaction is a nightmare for conveyancers, who now need to comply with the the legislative requirements of that piece of legislation. So the BSA has single-handedly added massive additional and unwelcome complexity and time to an already sort of overloaded conveyancing transaction.
Is mad. So that I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who said that if you buy a property in Italy, there is no conveyancing. Property law does not exist in Italy. You pay your money to the bank does the transfer, and then you exchange keys with someone.
Yeah, we do have a very, very sort of difficult and complex legal environment to work in England and Wales, and I don't think that that's truly sort of appreciated by everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's often, I think, just touching on that, is that it's almost like the iceberg kind of analogy, that people only see the very tip, and it's all the stuff that's underneath that no one sees and no one understands, which I guess is actually going to lead on probably quite nicely to my next question to you. I have an opinion on this, but I'm not going to say my opinion. I'm going to let you answer this, Rob, for me. Conveyancers spend a lot of their day chasing or being chased, right? I know that it's statistically that they say it's about 1/5 of their day. So actually, if you add that up over the week, 1 day out of 5, they are spending chasing or being chased.
Yep.
Right? Why?
It's a big question, but I think that actually the previous 2 questions that we've already gone through, Ben, almost give us a bit of the answer here, because if you think about the scope creep that we've just been discussing, every additional responsibility that you add onto the list of things to do for conveyancer gives rise to the chance of there being an additional query, the additional inquiries process. And also the delays that come with that, because it isn't just about one lawyer asking another lawyer for something and they immediately give it back. You can build days and sometimes weeks into this inquiries process by the exchanging of requests and answers and trying to establish what those answers are. So every additional responsibility leads to a potential additional inquiry. And so the more responsibilities we add, then the more chance there is of delays and inquiries. And every time you do that, then there's more chance that people are going to chase you for updates, because why are things taking so long? I do think we have a societal issue here, don't we, in terms of the expectation of the consumer is that things should be much quicker than they ever used to be, and the reality of conveyancing is that things take longer than they used to. So there's this huge sort of disparity between expectation and reality, and it's getting wider. And so you can buy a car and press click and it arrives the next morning, but you can't do that for houses. It takes like 4 months on average, or 5 months even sometimes. And that's just doesn't compute. So that's why lawyers get chased so much, because the expectation is that things should be done really quickly, and they don't understand why they're not. I also think, going back to the first answer of the first question, the UFI, the upfront information process, I think that could play a big part in why things are being chased all the time, because as soon as you start the seller's lawyer on the pathway of a conveyancing transaction, but wait until the property's been sold before they're instructed, then you're automatically putting them on the back foot. Okay, you're basically telling them to go full steam ahead, but they're not ready. Because they need to collate all the information first before they're going to be ready. So it's kind of a bit of a crazy situation. You kind of think, why do we do it this way? Why don't lawyers get instructed at the point of listing? Because it makes perfect sense. You wouldn't open a baker's shop and then tell your bakers to start baking the bread at 9 o'clock in the morning, because that's when the customers want to buy the bread. You'd bring the bakers in early to bake the bread ready for 9 o'clock, right? So it makes perfect sense, but from a conveyancing perspective, we wait till 9 o'clock before we start baking the bread. And therefore, you're building in the possibility of needing to rush, customer dissatisfaction, and ultimately, chasing and being chased. So
Yeah.
I do think that the conveyancing process itself, together with the change in consumer expectations, are probably the 2 main factors why there's so much chasing.
So I have 2 potentially Pandora box statements or questions to ask on this, that we could end up going off on a big tangent on this. So yeah, absolutely, I completely agree with you. I think, to come to the latter point of what you were just saying there, Rob, about instructing your conveyancer earlier, the average Joe consumer wouldn't have the first clue that this would actually be best practice.
Right.
And the first person that they're going to talk to is either their estate agent or their mortgage advisor.
Yep.
It's almost that, I guess, if you're a conveyancer and you've got a great relationship with an estate agent and or mortgage brokers, that they should be encouraging them surely to have that conversation earlier doors and just say, look, this customer, when you list with us, we want to make sure that process is going to go through as smooth as possible. Let's get your conveyancer on the go now. But they don't.
Well, not only that, Ben, but also, with the new National Trading Standards material information requirements that have been bestowed upon the estate agency profession, that's additional incentive to get the lawyer on board at the point of listing, because there's stuff in Part C of those material information requirements that you'd want a lawyer to confirm. You wouldn't necessarily, as an estate agent, want to be talking about restrictive covenants and easements from a legal title. So I think it's a win-win. I think the estate agents, for themselves, as well as for the sake of the consumer journey and the speed of the conveyancing, should be absolutely recommending that the seller is brought on board immediately.
Absolutely. And I think as well, like when conveyancers saying that, a fifth of their time is being spent being chased or chasing. If we think about it, that, a conveyancer does this every day. People don't move house every day. They're only moving house once every 7, 10, 15 years, 20 years. Maybe it's the first time in 40 years that someone's moved home. When you speak to a lawyer for the first time, I think that there needs to be some onus on whoever you speak to at that law practice, that they almost sit you down, metaphorically, and talk you through that process and what's going to happen, as opposed to, we're going to give you a login to a platform, or we're going to send you some stuff in the post and then need you to sign it, and we'll get cracking from there. You are now going into a whole process that you have no idea. As I said, when last time I moved 7 years ago, I was receiving like a tree every day for about a week with little post-it notes saying sign here, sign here, sign here. And I'm like, why isn't this electronic? But also, what am I signing here? And I'm not qualified as average Joe consumer to be able to read through and understand all of that, nor do I have the time. You mentioned about technology and clicking a button on a car, right? We're all used to being able to have instant gratification on the things that we want.
Yeah.
Surely somebody needs to be explaining this to the customer, the consumer, at that very beginning moment, to manage their expectations better.
I agree with you that consumer education is a big issue, and if it wasn't such an infrequently used legal service for the average consumer, like you say, once in every however many years, then I think there would be much greater emphasis on sort of law firms as a whole, or the industry as a whole, to get that sort of educational piece out there. But the fact is, if you're only moving once, say, in a decade, it's quite hard to sort of justify, a big marketing campaign based on someone's use of a service once every 10 years. But no, I agree with you from the point of view of, the consumer does need to try and understand what the job of the conveyancer is and why things take as long as they do. And that's only going to happen through communication, whether it's direct communication from the lawyer, whether it's via the estate agent or any other party. But again, big disconnect.
It is, and again, not to focus on this for too much. I am actually going through a scenario at the moment where my wife's car has failed the MOT with about 1,000 different things wrong with it, and we thought it was going to pass. Parts have turned up, and they're not the right parts, and so forth. And we've gone back and forth. We're not going to be without a car for 12 days in total. However, the communication that I've received has been, absolutely exceptional. This is a mechanics, right? You just pop your car to the MOT, and we're talking about a couple of grand to get this sorted. We're not talking about a several £100,000 transaction. But what they do is that they don't contact me and then just say, right, well, I'm going to need it for a week. They tell me why, what's going to happen, what's going to do, what the options are, etc., etc. And actually, whilst it's pretty rubbish having to receive those calls, as you say, communication is key. And actually, I'm okay with it, because it's been explained to me. When something isn't explained to you, that's when it all goes wrong, you know. But Rob, thanks. That's been really good. Liz, I feel we need to bring you into the fold here. This has been the Ben and Rob show so far. So nearly half of all law firms are yet to start to complete their net zero strategy. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a few different reasons for that, Ben, but firstly, I think really is fear, either not knowing where they start with it and or understanding the implications of what happens if they get it wrong. And out there in the press just now, there is a lot of greenwashing and negative press. So it's difficult for people to navigate. It's not a very easy chasm for firms to jump. And the guidance is unfortunately really complex. So the guidance at the moment is broken down into scopes. So there's 3 scopes. But if you choose to report on all of them, you could be showing yourself up to be in a very different light in terms of your contribution to carbon emissions than someone who chooses to only report on 1 or 2 of them. They're a lot less likely to yield larger results. So what firms need here now is expertise to do it. And some firms are going to have experts in-house who can help them out, but smaller firms, very unlikely that they'll have that resource. Not to mention, of course, as well, to be able to continue to monitor it, you have to engage in software. These platforms are really expensive, and so are the initiatives that you need to take on to reduce the emissions. And one other thing that I definitely would say about it is that we need to take the timescales into account, because the commitment is really far in the future. So the regulation ties right back to 2050. So the finish line feels quite far away for a lot of firms. So they don't feel that it's an immediate priority for them. So I think that those are just some of the reasons why firms haven't really grasped the nettle with it yet. Although I think those firms that do, the firms that do, really are putting themselves into quite a good competitive advantage.
I only need to refer back to when I moved 7 years ago, and I received that amount of paper weekly or daily for about a week, and I was just like, you know, I remember messaging my conveyancer saying, as a general sweeping statement, is there actually a need to print this out, kind of thing? And I never really got a straight answer back, because I was like, I'm one of hundreds of cases that you're dealing with here. And I was just like, this is not great, right? Like,
yeah, the awareness is just becoming much more and more now, and firms, law firms themselves are sitting. I mean, I don't want to go too into the next question that's coming up. They're struggling on what to do really now.
Okay, so just on that then, so why do you think then that currently such a small proportion of conveyances currently report on future climate change risks for all transactions?
Well, this kind of ties back to everything in a bit of the previous question. But on climate change then, so in April 2023, the Law Society issued its guidance on the impact of climate change upon solicitors. So firstly, and importantly for us to think about, climate change is a really dynamic and changeable risk issue, and its relevancy varies from transaction type. So it's very different for a commercial transaction than it would be for a residential one. But it's a really new space for conveyancers now to step into, for them to feel confident and credible when they're speaking around it, because it involves a very material learning journey. So it's going to be a slow progress on this, and it's one of the reasons why some conveyancers really would rather de-scope it from the retainers altogether and just be clear from the outset that they're not going to be advising on it. So one of the things is that the guidance doesn't say actually that you have to commission a search with every transaction. It just states that a conveyancer has a duty to warn, to disclose, and to uphold service and competency levels. So ultimately what's happening here now is that many practitioners are just awaiting more specific guidance. And this has been drafted actually by the Law Society currently. So I think the legal world really are waiting for tighter guidance before they start to commit to what their strategy and the learning paths of their firms are going to be.
Sure, definitely. Well, look, Liz, Rob, that's been really informative. It's been really good to chat to you today. I hope everyone viewing this has taken something away from this. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again on another Esther's webinar. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Thanks, Ben.